Chapter 11 of Book 3 of Rhetoric. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Rhetoric by Aristotle, translated by Thomas Taylor. Chapter 11 of Book 3. Let us now show what we mean by placing a thing before the eyes, and what is to be done in order to effect this. I say then that those words place a thing before the eyes which signify things energizing. Thus for instance to say, that a good man is a square, is metaphorical. For both a good man and a square are perfect, but it does not signify energy. But to say, possessing a flourishing acme, signifies energy. Likewise to say, but you as liberated, indicates energy. And, then with impetuous feet forth rushed the Greeks, Here the word impetuous is energy, and a metaphor. Thus too energy is everywhere exhibited by Homer, who speaks of inanimate things as animated, through a metaphor. But to produce energy in everything as he does is very much applauded, as in the following instances. Back on the ground then rolled the shameless stone, and the arrow flew, and longing to strike, and Trojan and Grecian darts in earth then stood, and longed to gorge themselves with human blood, and the furious pointed dart then pierced his breast, For in all these instances, because the things are animated, they appear to energize. For to be shameless and furious, etc. are energies. But Homer has added these through metaphor from analogy. For as the stone is to Sisyphus, so is an impudent person to him who he impudently torments. Homer likewise in his celebrated images attributes to inanimate things the proper energies of such as are animated, as the afflicted deeps tumultuous mix and roar. The waves behind impel the waves before, wide rolling, foaming high, and tumbling to the shore. For he makes everything moving and living. But energy is imitation. Metaphors, however, ought to be derived, as we have before observed, from things familiar and not obvious, just as in philosophy it is the province of a sagacious man to survey the similar in things very different from each other. As Archytas says, that an arbiter and an altar are the same thing, for he who is injured flies to both these. Or if some one should say, that an anchor and a cremastra are the same thing, for both perform an office which is in a certain respect the same, but they differ in this, that the one is fixed above and the other beneath. To say also that cities are anomalous is another instance of an appropriate metaphor taken from things very dissimilar. For as a superficies is said to be anomalous because one part rises above another, so a city may be said to be anomalous when some of the citizens in it surpass others in power. Polite diction, however, is for the most part effected through metaphor and previous deception. For the diction, which not only causes us to learn something of which we were before ignorant, but also something about which we had been before deceived, is more polite and pleasant, since the mind passing from error to truth is delighted, and says to itself, how true is this, which I have learnt. I was in an error. Of apothegms likewise, those are polite which imply something different from what the words at first seem to signify, as that apothegm of Stesichorus, that the grasshoppers would sing to them on the ground. Good enigmas, also, are for the same reason pleasing. For they cause us to learn something, and are metaphorical. And as Theodorus says, It is pleasing to say something new. But this is effected when what is said is paradoxical, and (as he says) is not conformable to prior opinion, but as in ridiculous assertions is slightly transformed. This likewise is capable of being effected by jests, in which the letters of the words are somewhat changed, for these pleasantly deceive the hearer. And also in verse, for something is said different from what the hearer expected. He walked along with chilblains on his feet, but the hearer expected it would have been said that he had sandals on his feet. This kind of jest, however, ought to be immediately manifest. Paragrams, or jests formed by the mutation of letters, are produced, when that is not signified which the words at first seem to signify, as the jest of Theodorus upon Nicon the harper. For Nicon having been vexed by a certain person, Theodorus deriding him said, thrati in, which appears as if he had said, he disturbs you, thratai enin, and deceives the hearer. For in reality he said, he makes you a Thracian. Hence this is pleasing to him who learns the true meaning of what is said. For unless the hearer apprehends that Nicon was a Thracian, the jest would not appear to be polite. Thus also to say baulei auton Persai seems at the first view to signify, are you willing to vex him? But the true meaning is, are you willing to make him a favourer of the Persians, and a betrayer of the Greeks? It is requisite, however, that each sense of the ambiguous word should be adapted to him of whom it is said. Another example is such as the following, the arche of the sea was not to the Athenians the arche of evils, for they derived advantage from it. And as Isocrates says, the arche of the sea was to the city, i.e. to the Athenians, the arche of evils. For in both these instances the real meaning is different from what at the first view it appears to be, and the hearer knows that what is asserted is true. For to say that arche was arche is to say nothing to the purpose. But this is not what is said in the above instances, nor is that denied which is asserted, but the word has another meaning. In all these instances, however, if the word is appropriately employed, whether it be a homonymous word or a metaphor, then the diction is proper, as if the name of someone were Anaxitus, and it should be said that Anaxitus is not Anaxitus, i.e. importunate. For he who says this denies the homonymous signification of the word. And this is appropriately effected if the word is always used twice. Again, O hosps, i.e. guest, you will not become more hosps than is requisite. And it is not necessary that hopes should always be hopes. For this also is foreign. The same thing also is effected in the celebrated saying of Anaxandrides, it is a beautiful thing to die prior to having done any thing deserving of death. For this is the same thing as to say, it is worthwhile to die when not deserving to die, or it is worthwhile to die when not deserving of death, or not doing things worthy of death. The form of diction, therefore, is the same in these instances, but in proportion as they are shorter and contain a greater opposition, in such proportion they are more elegant and pleasing. The cause, however, of this is, that we in a greater degree learn something from opposition, and that this is more rapidly effected by brevity. but it is always necessary that the person should be present on whom the thing is said, or that it should be rightly said, if the assertion is true, and not superficial, for these two things may exist separately. Thus for instance, to say, "It is necessary to die free from all faults," and "It is requisite that a worthy man should marry a worthy woman," is true, but is not politely said. But to say, "It is worth while to die, when not deserving to die," is both true and politely said. The diction, also, will appear to be more polite, the more it contains of those things from which politeness is derived. As if the words are metaphorical, and metaphors of such a kind, and if there is antithesis, adequation, and energy. Images likewise, as we have before observed, are always after a manner approved metaphors. For they are always derived from two things, in the same manner as an analogous metaphor. Thus we say that a shield is the cup of Mars, and that a bow is a stringless harp. When we thus speak, however, the assertion is not simple. But to say that a bow is a harp, or a shield a cup, is a simple assertion. They assimilate, however, as follows: as a player on the flute to an ape, and a short-sighted man to a trickling lamp. For in both there is a contraction, but images are celebrated when they contain a metaphor. For it is to assimilate, to say that a shield is the cup of Mars, that a ruinous building is a worn-out garment, and that Niceratus, according to the assimilation of Thrasymachus, was Philoctetes bit by the poet Prates. For Thrasymachus said this in consequence of seeing Niceratus vanquished by Prates in a poetical contest, and through this neglecting his person. In these similitudes, however, poets fail unless they are proper, even if they are celebrated. I mean, for instance, when they say, "He carries legs like parsley bent," and "as Philemon with Corycus yoked in contest," and all such things are images. But that images are metaphors has been frequently observed by us. Proverbs likewise are metaphors from species to species, i.e. in which one species is predicated of another on account of agreement in the same genus. Thus of him who expects to derive advantage from a certain thing, if he should afterwards suffer a loss from it, it is said as the Carpathian the hare. For both suffered the evil we have mentioned. And thus we have nearly assigned the cause whence and why diction is polite. Celebrated hyperboles also are metaphors, as of one who had contusions on his face. "You would have thought him to be a basket of mulberries," for the part under the eyes is red. But this hyperbole is much too great. An hyperbole, however, may differ from an hyperbole in the diction, as instead of saying, "Philemon yoked in contest with Corycus," it might be said, "You would have thought it was Philemon fighting with Corycus," and instead of saying, "He carried legs as distorted as parsley," it might be said, "I should have thought that he had not legs, but parsley, they are so distorted." Hyperboles, however, are puerile, for they indicate a vehement motion of the soul. Hence they are especially used by those who are angry. Thus Achilles in Iliad 9 speaks hyperbolically, when he says he is not to be appeased by the gifts of Agamemnon. "Though bribes were heaped on bribes in number more than dust in fields, or sands along the shore." And "Atride's daughter never shall be led, an ill-matched consort to Achilles' bed, like golden Venus though she charmed the heart, or vied with Pallas in the works of art." The Attic rhetoricians also especially use hyperboles, on which account it is unbecoming in an old man to speak hyperbolically. CHAPTER 12. It is, however, requisite not to be ignorant that a different diction is adapted to each genus of orations. For graphic and agonistic diction, i.e. the diction employed in writing and at the bar, are not the same, nor forensic, and that which is employed in popular harangues. But it is necessary to know both these kinds of diction, for to know the one is to know how to speak properly, and by a knowledge of the other we are not compelled to be silent when we wish to impart something to others, which those suffer who do not know how to write. But graphic diction, or the diction pertaining to writing, is indeed most accurate, but the agonistic, or that which belongs to the bar, is most adapted to action. Of this latter, however, there are two species, one ethical, but the other pathetic. Hence, also, players choose dramas of this kind, and poets choose such like players to act their fables. Those poets, likewise, are most approved whose fables delight not only when acted, but also when read, such as those of Chaeremon, whose diction is as accurate as that of any writer of orations. And among the dithyrambic poets, those of Lysimachus. When orations also are compared with each other, those which are written will appear when recited in forensic contests to be jejune. On the other hand, those orations which when publicly delivered are heard with applause, if they are perused when written, will appear to be unpolished and inaccurate. The reason of which is, that they are merely adapted to forensic contests. Hence, those which are adapted to action, when deprived of action, in consequence of not accomplishing their proper work, appear to be jejune. Thus, for instance, disjointed sentences and frequent repetition are rightly rejected in the diction pertaining to writing. But rhetoricians use these in the diction which belongs to the bar, for both these are adapted to action. This repetition, however, ought to be delivered with a change of the voice, which as it were prepares the way for action, as, He it is who robbed you, he it is who deceived you, he it is who at last endeavoured to betray you, as Philemon the player also did whilst he acted in the Gerontomeria of Anaxandrides, when Rhadamanthus and Palamede speak, and also in the prologue of the play called the Pious, where I is frequently repeated. For if such repetitions are not accompanied with action, the actor, according to the proverb, will seem to carry a beam. The like also must be observed with respect to disjointed sentences, such as I came, I met him, I requested him. For it is necessary that these should be accompanied with action, and not, as if only one thing was said, pronounced with the same manner, and the same tone of voice. Farther still, disjointed diction possesses something peculiar, since in an equal time many things appear to be said. For the conjunction, or connective copula, causes many things to be one, so that if it is taken away, it is evident that on the contrary one thing will be many. Hence he amplifies who says, I came, I spoke to him, I supplicated him much, but he seems to despise whatever I have said, whatever I do say. Homer also intends to do this, when speaking of Nereus in the second book of the Iliad, he says, 3 ships with Nereus sought the Trojan shore, Nereus, whom Aglae to Charopus bore, Nereus in faultless shape and blooming grace, the loveliest youth of all the Grecian race. For he, of whom many things are said, must necessarily be frequently mentioned. If, therefore, he is frequently mentioned, many things also appear to be said of him. Hence Homer, though he has only mentioned Nereus in one place, amplifies from paralogism, and mentions him here, though he did not intend to mention him in any other place afterwards. The diction therefore adapted to popular harangues perfectly resembles sciagraphy. For the greater the number of the spectators, the more remotely is such a picture to be seen. Hence, in both accuracy is superfluous, and both become worse through it. But judicial diction is more accurate, and it is requisite that the diction should be still more accurate, which is addressed to one judge. For this is the least thing in rhetorical diction. For that which is appropriate to, and that which is foreign from a thing, are more easily perceived. In this case also, contention is absent, so that the judgment is pure. Hence, the same rhetoricians are not celebrated in all these kinds of diction. But where action is especially necessary, their accuracy is in the smallest degree requisite. And where voice, and especially a loud one is required, there action is necessary. Demonstrative diction, therefore, is most proper for writing. For demonstrative orations are composed in order that they may be read. But judicial diction is the next in order. It is however superfluous to divide diction into the pleasing and magnificent. For why may it not as well be divided into the temperate and liberal, or into any other ethical virtue? For it is evident that the particulars already mentioned will render it pleasing, if the virtue of diction has been rightly defined by us. For why ought it to be perspicuous, and not abject, but decorous? Since it will not be perspicuous, either if it be verbose or concise. But it is evident that the medium between these is appropriate. The particulars also, before mentioned, render diction pleasing, if usual and foreign words are well mingled together, and likewise rhythm, and that which is calculated to persuade from the decorous. And thus much concerning diction, as well in common about every, as in particular about each genus. Chapter 13. It now remains that we should speak concerning the order of diction. But there are two parts of an oration. For it is necessary to speak of the thing which is the subject of discussion, and then to demonstrate. Hence it is impossible for him who narrates a thing not to demonstrate, or that he should demonstrate without previous narration. For he who demonstrates, demonstrates something, and he who propounds, propounds for the sake of demonstrating. Of these necessary parts of an oration, however, the one is the proposition, but the other the confirmation. In the same manner as in the sciences, one thing is a problem, but another a demonstration. But the division which rhetoricians now make is ridiculous. For narration belongs to a forensic oration. But in the demonstrative and deliberative genus, how can there be an oration, such as they say there is, or those things which are urged against the opponent? Or how can there be a peroration of things demonstrative? The proem, however, the comparison, and the repetition, then take place in orations to the people, when there is altercation, (for in these there is frequently accusation and defense), but not so far as there is consultation in these. But neither does peroration belong to every forensic oration. For it is not requisite, when the oration is short, or the thing can easily be remembered, since in this peroration it would happen that something would be taken away from the length of such an oration. The necessary parts of an oration, therefore, are proposition and proof. And these indeed are proper or peculiar parts. But the most numerous parts of an oration are the proem, the proposition, proof, and peroration. For what is said against the opponent pertains to proof, and the comparison is an amplification of our arguments, so that it is a certain part of the proof, for he demonstrates something who does this. Neither the proem, however, nor the peroration is a part of the proof, but each is subservient to recollection. If, therefore, any one makes a division of things of this kind, like the followers of Theodorus, narration, pre-narration, supernarration, confutation, and superconfutation will be different from each other. It is necessary, however, that he who speaks of a certain species and difference of a thing should give a name to it, for if not, it will become vain and nugatory. And this fault of needlessly introducing new names was committed by Lycimnius in his Art of Rhetoric, when he speaks of eruption, aberration, and ramification. Chapter 14. The proem, therefore, is the beginning of an oration, which in dramatic poetry is the prologue, and in playing on the pipe the prelude. For all these are principles, or beginnings, and, as it were, preparatory to what follows. And the prelude, indeed, is similar to the proem of the demonstrative kind of orations. For as those that play on the pipe connect the prelude with the beginning of the song, thus also in demonstrative orations, immediately after the orator has mentioned what he wishes to say, it is necessary to collect aptly with it what is to follow. Of which all rhetoricians adduce as an example the proem of Isocrates in his oration in praise of Helen. For Isocrates begins his encomium with blaming the sophists, which has nothing in common with the praise of Helen. And yet, because he has aptly conjoined it with the argument, he has obtained praise. But the proems of demonstrative orations are derived from praise or blame, as in the proem of Gorgias to his Olympic oration, O Greeks, this is a thing worthy of general admiration. For he praises those who instituted the public spectacles. Isocrates, on the contrary, blames them, because they honoured indeed with gifts the virtues of the body, but appointed no reward for wise men. The proems also of demonstrative orations are derived from counsel and advice, such for instance as, that it is requisite to honour good men, on which account he, the orator, has undertaken to praise Aristides, or as he who wrote an oration in praise of Paris, for he says, that it is neither requisite to praise those who are celebrated, nor those who are of no account, but those who are good, and at the same time obscure men, such as was Paris, the son of Priam. For he who thus begins his oration is one that gives counsel. Farther still, the proems of demonstrative orations are derived from forensic proems. But this is from things pertaining to the hearer, if the oration is concerning something paradoxical, or difficult, or much celebrated, so as to require pardon from the auditors. Such for instance as the proem of Corylus, But now, since all things are divulged. The proems, therefore, of demonstrative orations are derived from these things, viz. From praise and blame, from exhortation and dissuasion, and from those things which are referred to the hearer. It is necessary, however, that the proems should either be foreign or appropriate to the oration. With respect to proems of the forensic kind, it is necessary to assume that they are able to effect the same thing as the prologues of dramatic, and the proems of epic poems. For dithyrambic proems are similar to those of the demonstrative kind, as, on account of thee, and thy gifts or spoils. But in dramatic and epic poems, the proems are a specimen of what is to follow, that the reader may foresee what the subject of them is, and that his mind may not be kept in suspense. For that which is indefinite causes the mind to wander. The poet, therefore, who delivers into the hands of the reader the beginning of his poem, makes him follow with attention the rest of it. Hence Homer, The wrath of Peleus' son, O goddess, sing, and The man for wisdom's various arts renowned, Long exercised in woes, O muse, resound. And another poet, Again, O muse, inspire my verse, and sing How from the Asian land a mighty war Spread over Europe. Tragic poets also indicate respecting the drama, though not immediately, as Euripides does, yet they indicate what it is in the prologue, as Sophocles in the Oedipus, Polybius was my father, and after the same manner comic poets. The most necessary and proper office, therefore, of a proem is this, to unfold the end for the sake of which the oration was composed. On which account, if the end is manifest, and the subject matter is trifling, the proem must be omitted. Other species of proems, however, which are used by orators, are remedies and things of a common nature. And these are derived from the speaker and the hearer, from the subject matter, and from the opponent. From the orator, therefore, and the opponent, those proems are derived which pertain to the dissolving or making an accusation, but these must not be similarly employed by the plaintiff and defendant. For by the defendant, what pertains to accusation must be introduced in the beginning, but by the plaintiff at the end of the oration. But for what reason it is not immanifest. For it is necessary that the defendant, when he is about to introduce himself, should remove all impediments, so that he must dissolve the accusation at the beginning of his speech. But the opponent should be criminated by the plaintiff at the end, in order that the hearers may remember the better. What, however, pertains to the auditor consists in rendering him benevolent to the orator, and enraged with the opponent. Sometimes also it is advantageous to the cause that the auditor should be attentive, and sometimes that he should not. For it is not always beneficial to render him attentive. Hence many orators endeavour to excite laughter in their hearers. A summary account of a thing also contributes to celerity of apprehension. And this is likewise effected by the orator's appearing to be a worthy man. For the audience are more attentive to men of this description. But they are attentive to great things, to things pertaining to themselves, to admirable and to delightful things. Hence it is necessary to inform the audience that the oration will be concerning things of this kind. On the contrary, if the orator wishes the audience not to be attentive to the cause, he must say that the subject matter is a thing of small consequence, that it does not pertain to them, and that it is a troublesome affair. It is necessary, however, not to be ignorant that all such things are foreign to the orations, for they pertain to a depraved hearer, and to one who attends to what is foreign to the purpose. For if he were not a person of this description, there would be no occasion for a proem, except so far as it is requisite to give a summary account of the affair, in order that the oration, as a body, may have a head. Farther still, to render the audience attentive, if it should be requisite, is common to all the parts of an oration, because universally the audience are less attentive to what is said in the progress than in the beginning of the oration. Hence it is ridiculous to endeavour to procure attention in the beginning of the oration, because then all the hearers are especially attentive. Hence attention is to be procured wherever occasion offers, by saying for instance, Give me your attention, for this business is not more mine than yours, and I will relate to you a transaction of such a nature that you have never heard of anything so dreadful or so admirable. But this is, as Prodicus says, when the audience are drowsy, to promise to say something to them from his demonstration, estimated at 50 drachmas. It is evident, however, that the proem is referred to the auditor, not so far as he is an auditor, for all orators in the proems either criminate or dissolve fear, as from the Antigone of Sophocles, I will tell you, O king, though it was not my intention to have come hither as a messenger. And from the Iphigenia in Taurus of Euripides, Why do you preface? A proem also is necessary when the cause is bad, or appears to be bad, for in this case it is better to discuss any thing else than to dwell upon the cause. Hence servants do not directly reply to the question they are asked, but their answer is circuitous and prefatory. But we have shown whence it is requisite to render the audience benevolent, and have explained every thing else of this kind. Since, however, it is well said by Ulysses to Minerva in Odyssey 14, Give me as a friend, and a man to be pitied, to reach Phoenicia's land. It is necessary to pay attention to these two things. But in proems of the demonstrative kind, it is necessary to make the auditor fancy that either himself, or his race, or his pursuits, or something else belonging to him, is praised, together with the person who is the subject of the oration. For what Socrates says in the Menexemus of Plato is true, that it is not difficult to praise the Athenians among the Athenians, but among the Lacedaemonians. But the proems of popular orations are derived from those of the forensic kind. For these have not naturally any themselves, since the audience are well acquainted with the subject, and the thing itself is not in want of any proem. But a proem is here requisite either on account of the orator, or the opponents, or if the audience should not think the affair of just so much consequence as it is, but of greater or less consequence. Hence it is necessary either to criminate the opponent, or to dissolve the accusation against him, and either to amplify or diminish the affair. But for the sake of these things a proem is requisite, or a proem is necessary for the sake of ornament, since without this the oration will appear to be carelessly composed. And such is the encomium of Gorgias on the Eleans, for without any previous extension and graceful movement of his arms, like the Athletae before they engage, he immediately begins, Elis, a happy city. End of chapter 14 of book 3. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 15 of book 3 of Rhetoric. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Rhetoric by Aristotle. Translated by Thomas Taylor. Chapter 15 of book 3. With respect, however, to the dissolution of crimes objected by the opponent, one mode is derived from those things through which the ill opinion of the audience may be removed. For it makes no difference whether this opinion arises from what is said or not, so that this mode is universal. Another mode consists in obviating such particulars as are dubious, either by showing that the thing which is the subject of doubt does not exist, or that it is not noxious, or that it is not noxious to this person, or that it is not so pernicious as the opponent contends it to be, or that it is not unjust, or that it is not greatly so, or that it is not disgraceful, or that it is a thing of small consequence. For things of this kind are the subjects of contention. And this mode was adopted by Iphicrates against Nausicrates, for he confessed that he did what he was accused by Nausicrates of having done, and that he did harm to the person, but did not act unjustly. Or he that has injured another may say that he has made him a compensation, so that if what he did was noxious, yet it was beautifully done; if painful, yet it was beneficial. Or something else of the like kind may be said. Another mode consists in showing that the deed which is objected to as a crime was an error, or happened from misfortune, or from necessity. Thus Sophocles said, That he trembled not, as his accuser said, that he might seem to be an old man, but from necessity, for he was not willingly 80 years of age." An excuse also may be made by asserting that the deed was not done with a view to that end it is said to have been done by the opponent. Thus he who is accused of having injured another person may say, that it was not his intention to injure him, but that the injury was accidental, and that it would be just to hate him if the injury had been done by him voluntarily. Another mode consists in considering whether the opponent himself, or some of his kindred, have now, or formerly, been involved in the crime which he objects to the defendant. Another mode consists in showing that those also are involved in the crime whom the opponent confesses not to be obnoxious to the accusation. As if the opponent should confess that this man, though he is an adulterer, is pure in his conduct, then this and this man also will be pure. Another mode consists in showing that if the opponent has accused others falsely before, it is probable that he now falsely accuses the defendant. Or if it is shown that those who are now accused have been at another time falsely accused, for then it is probable that now also they are falsely accused. In order likewise to remove a bad opinion, it may be said that the same persons, who at another time have been suspected of a crime, though no one has accused them, have been found to be innocent. Another mode consists in reciprocally criminating the accuser. For if the accuser is unworthy of belief, it is absurd that his assertions should be credible. Another mode consists in showing that the present cause has been decided before, as Euripides does in the action against Hygiaontes, which is called Antidosis, who accused him as an impious person. For when he objected to Euripides that in that verse of his, The tongue has sworn, but unsworn is the mind, he persuaded men to perjure themselves. Euripides replied, That his accuser acted unjustly in bringing decisions into a court of justice which had formerly been made in the contest pertaining to Bacchus. For in that tribunal he had defended the verse, and would again defend it, if he was willing to accuse him in that place." Another mode consists in reprobating false accusations, and in showing how great an evil calumny is, and that it is also attended with the evil of producing other judicial processes. The place, however, which is derived from symbols is common to both, i.e. to him who accuses, and to the crimination. Thus Ulysses in the tragedy called Teucer, accuses Teucer as the friend of the Trojans, because he was allied to Priam. For Hesione, the mother of Teucer, was the sister of Priam. But Teucer replied, that his father, Telamon, was an enemy to Priam, and that he (Teucer) did not discover to the Trojans the spies which the Greeks sent to Troy. Another place pertains to the accuser, and consists in praising in a small degree, in order to blame afterwards more copiously. And if the opponent has performed any great deed, to mention it concisely, or having enumerated many of his good deeds, which do not pertain to the cause, to blame one of his actions, which does not pertain to it. But accusers of this kind are most artificial and unjust. For they endeavour to injure by good deeds, mingling them with one evil deed. It is common, however, to the accuser, and to him who dissolves the crime, since it is possible that the same thing may have been done for the sake of many things. It is common to the accuser, indeed, to represent the affair in the worst, but to him who dissolves the crime to represent it in the best point of view. Thus it may be said, that Diomed preferred Ulysses as his associate in the night adventure in Iliad 10, because he thought Ulysses to be the best of the Greeks. Or it may be said, that he did not prefer him for this reason, but because he alone was not his antagonist, as being a man of no consequence. And thus much concerning accusation. CHAPTER 16. But narration in demonstrative orations is not continued, but distinguished into parts. For it is necessary in demonstrative orations to enumerate those actions from which the oration is composed. For an oration of this kind is composed so as to be partly inartificial (since the orator is not the cause of any of the actions), and partly artificial. This, however, consists in showing either that the thing is, if it is incredible, or what the quality or quantity of it is, or in exhibiting all these. On this account, sometimes it is not requisite to narrate every thing, because thus to demonstrate is adverse to facility of remembrance. Thus, for instance, it may be said, that from these things it appears that he is a brave man, but from those a wise or a just man. And the one oration is more simple, i.e. the oration in which every thing is narrated in a continued series without any confirmation and amplification. But the other, in which there is confirmation and amplification, is various and not elaborate. It is necessary, however, to call to mind things and persons known and celebrated, on which account the greater part of celebrated persons and things do not require narration. As if, for instance, you should be willing to praise Achilles, for all men are acquainted with his actions. But it is requisite to make use of these actions. But if you were willing to praise Critias, narration is necessary, for he is not known by many persons. At present, however, rhetoricians ridiculously say that narration should be rapid. Though what a certain person said in reply to a baker who asked, whether he wished that he should make soft or hard bread, may be applied to these. For his answer was, is it not possible to make good bread so that it may be neither hard nor soft, but of a moderate condition? For it is requisite neither to make a long narration, as neither is it necessary to make a long exordium, nor to dwell on the credibility of what is narrated, since here also propriety consists neither in rapidity nor conciseness, but in mediocrity. But this is effected by narrating such things as render the affair manifest, or such things as induce the audience to believe that the thing has been done, or that the person has been hurt, or the injury has been committed, or that the transactions were of the magnitude which the orator wishes the hearer to believe they were. Things, however, of a nature contrary to these are to be adduced by the opponent. The orator likewise should insert in his narration such things as pertain to his own virtue, such as, but I always admonish him to act justly, and not to desert his children. Or he should insert in his narration such things as pertain to the depravity of another person, as in the above instance, but he answered me that wherever he was he should have other children, which Herodotus in Euterpe says was the answer of the Egyptians when they revolted from their king. Or he should insert such things as are pleasing to the judges. To the defendant, however, narration is less necessary. But the subjects of controversies are, whether a thing has been done or not, whether it is detrimental or not, whether it is unjust or not, and whether it is a thing of so much consequence or not. Hence the defendant must not dwell upon a thing that is acknowledged, unless something is said in opposition to his statement of the affair. For then he must show, that admitting the thing to have been done, yet it was not unjust. Farther still, it is necessary to narrate things which have not been done, as if they had been done, if they are calculated to produce commiseration or indignation. Examples of this are the fabulous narration of Ulysses to Alcinous, and again to Penelope, which is effected in 30 verses. Another example is that of Phaelus, who contracted a very long poem which is called The Circle, and also the prologue of Euripides in his Aeneas. But it is necessary that the narration should be ethical, and this will be effected if we know what produces manners. One thing therefore which produces them is a manifestation of deliberate choice, and manners are good or bad from the quality which they possess. But deliberate choice is such as it is from the end. On this account, mathematical discussions are not ethical, because they do not contain in themselves deliberate choice. For they have not that for the sake of which a thing is done, i.e. they do not consider the end. But this is the business of Socratic discussions, for these consider things of this kind. The oration also expresses manners, which exhibits such things as are consequent to manners, such as, that at the same time he said these things, he went away. For this manifests audacity and rusticity of manners. The oration likewise is rendered ethical by not speaking as if from a syllogistic process, like rhetoricians of the present day, but as if from deliberate intention, as I have wished, and for this was the object of my deliberate choice, since though I should desire no emolument from it, it is a better thing. For the one, i.e. to speak as if from a syllogistic process, is the province of a prudent man, but the other, i.e. to speak from deliberate intention, is the province of a good man. For it belongs to a prudent man to pursue what is beneficial, but to a good man to pursue what is beautiful in conduct. If, however, what you narrate is incredible, then the cause is to be explained. An example of which is from the Antigone of Sophocles, that she was more anxiously concerned for her brother than for her husband or children, for she might repair the loss of her husband and children by marrying again, but her mother and father having descended to Hades, she could never have another brother. But if you cannot assign the cause, you may say, that you are not ignorant, you relate what is incredible, but that you are naturally disposed not to admit any thing disgraceful. For mankind do not believe that any action is performed willingly, except it is advantageous. Again, that the narration may be ethical, it is requisite that it should be pathetic. And this is effected by relating such things as are consequent to the passions, which are known to the audience, and which particularly relate either to the orator or his opponent, as, but he departed, looking after me, and as Aeschines says of Cratylus, that he hissed and clapped with his hands. For these things are adapted to persuade, because these things which the audience know are symbols of what they do not know. Many things also of this kind may be assumed from Homer, as in Odyssey 19, then o'er her face the beldam spread her hands. For those who begin to weep cover their eyes with their hands. In the beginning of the oration, likewise, you should introduce yourself as a worthy, and your opponent as an unworthy man, that the audience may survey you and your opponent as such. But this should be done latently. And that this may be easily accomplished may be seen from those who announce anything to us. For concerning things of which we know nothing, we at the same time form a certain opinion of their truth or falsehood. In many places, however, it is necessary to narrate, and sometimes not in the beginning of the oration. But in a popular oration there is no need of narration, because no one makes a narration of future events. If, however, there should happen to be a narration in it, it will be of past events, in order that by recalling them into the memory there may be a better consultation about such as are future, either employing on this occasion accusation or praise. But then he who does this will not perform the office of a counsellor. If, however, that which is narrated is incredible, then you ought to promise the audience that you will immediately assign the cause of it, and leave it to the audience to believe or not, as they please. Thus Iocasta in the Oedipus of Carcinus, when she says something incredible in answer to him who asks her concerning his son, always promises that she would prove the truth of what she had said. And the Aemon of Sophocles employs the same art. Chapter 17. It is necessary, however, that credibility should be demonstrative. But it is requisite to demonstrate (since controversy is respecting four things) by adducing a demonstration of the controverted subject. Thus, for instance, if it is controverted whether a thing has been done, it is especially necessary in a judicial process to give a demonstration of this. Or if it is controverted whether this man has been injured, or whether he has been injured to the extent alleged, or whether justly or not, and in a similar manner of the existence of the thing controverted, nor must we be ignorant that in this controversy alone, one of the persons must necessarily be depraved. For here ignorance is not the cause, as if certain persons were disputing about justice, so that this controversy, but not others, must be diligently discussed. But in demonstrative orations, the amplification will for the most part consist in showing that actions have been beautiful and beneficial. For it is necessary to believe in facts. For demonstrations are seldom given of these things unless they are incredible, or another person is supposed to be the cause of them. In popular orations, however, it may be contended that a thing will not be, or that what is advised will take place, but that it is not just, or it is not beneficial, or that it is not of such great consequence. It is likewise necessary to see whether the opponent has asserted anything false, which does not pertain to the cause, since from this, as from a sign, it may be inferred that he has also spoken falsely in other things. Examples, however, are indeed most adapted to popular orations, but enthymemes to judicial orations. For the former are conversant with the future, so that examples must necessarily be derived from past events. But judicial orations are conversant with things which exist, or do not exist, in which there is in a greater degree demonstration and necessity. For that which has been done is attended with necessity. Enthymemes, however, must not be adduced in a continued series, but must be mingled with other things more pleasant and easy, since if this is not done, they will be detrimental to each other. For there is a boundary of quantity. Hence in Homer, in Odyssey 4, Menelaus praises Pisistratus, the son of Nestor, for the mediocrity of his speech. Dear youth, you have said just as much as a wise man would have said. For he does not praise him that he said such things, but so much, and no more. Nor must enthymemes be investigated in every subject. For if this precept is not observed, you will do that which some of those who philosophize do, who syllogistically collect things more known and credible than the propositions from which they are deduced. When, likewise, you wish to excite the passions, do not introduce an enthymeme, i.e. abstain from argument. For the enthymeme will either expel the passion, or will be introduced in vain. For motions which exist at one and the same time expel each other, and either destroy themselves, or become imbecile. Nor when the oration is ethical is it proper at the same time to search for any enthymeme. For demonstration has neither the power of expressing manners, nor deliberate choice. Sentences, however, must be used both in narration and confirmation, for they are ethical, as, And I indeed entrusted him with this, though I knew that it was not proper to believe in any man. But if you wish to speak pathetically, you may say, and I do not repent, though I have been injured. For gain is with him, but justice with me." It is not without reason, however, that popular orations are more difficult than such as are judicial, because they are conversant with the future, but the judicial are conversant with the past, which is scientifically known to diviners, as Epimenides the Cretan said. For he did not predict about future events, but about such past events as were immanifest. And the law is an hypothesis in judicial orations, but he who possesses the principle can more easily discover the demonstration. Popular orations likewise have not many digressions, such for instance as a digression to the opponent, either respecting himself, or which may produce the pathetic. But such orations admit these, the least of all things, unless they depart from their proper employment. It is requisite therefore that he should digress, who is in want of arguments. And this method is adopted by the Athenian rhetoricians, and also by Isocrates. For giving counsel, he accuses the Lacedaemonians in his panegyric, but in his oration concerning peace he accuses Chares. In demonstrative orations, however, it is requisite to insert praise as an episode, as Isocrates does, for he always introduces something which he may praise. And Gorgias employed the same art, who said, "that he should never be in want of an oration." For if he speaks of Achilles, he praises Peleus, afterwards Aeacus, and afterwards the god, i.e. Jupiter, the great grandfather of Achilles. In a similar manner he praises the fortitude of Achilles. He, therefore, who has demonstrations, may speak both ethically and demonstratively. But if you have not enthymemes, you may speak ethically. And it is more adapted to a worthy man that he should appear to be a good man, than that he should deliver an accurate oration. Of enthymemes, however, those which are adapted to confutation are more approved than those which are demonstrative, because such things as produce confutation are evidently more syllogistic, for contraries when placed by each other become more known. Arguments, however, which are employed against the opponent are not specifically different from those which we employ in our own defence, but it pertains to credibility to dissolve some things by objection and others by syllogism. It is also necessary, both in consultation and in a judicial process, that he who first pleads his cause should in the first place confirm his cause, but afterwards should dissolve or extenuate the arguments contrary to his own. But if the opposing arguments are many, these must be first confuted, as Callistratus did in the Messeniac assembly. For he first refuted what his adversaries could say, and then said what conduced to his own cause. He, however, who speaks in the second place, ought first to encounter the reasoning of his adversary, dissolving it, and syllogizing in opposition to it, and especially if the arguments of his opponents have been approved. For as the soul is not favourably disposed towards those who have been already accused of crimes, after the same manner neither does it willingly attend to an oration, if the opponent appears to have spoken well. In order to prepare the mind of the auditor, therefore, to hear an oration, it is necessary first to show that what the opponent has said is false. Hence the orator must fight against either all the arguments of his opponent, or the greatest of them, or those which are most approved, or those which may be easily confuted, and thus render his own arguments credible. Thus Hecuba in Euripides, "But first the goddesses I will assist, for Juno, etc." For here Hecuba first confutes what was most infirm, and thus much concerning confirmation. But with respect to manners, since for a man to say certain things about himself is either invidious, or is attended with circumlocution, or contradiction, and to speak of another is attended either with slander or rusticity, hence it is necessary to introduce another person speaking, as Isocrates does in his oration against Philip, and in his Antidosis, and as Archilochus blames. For he makes the father Lycambes say concerning his daughter in an iambic verse, There is nothing which may not be expected to be done, and nothing which will not be sworn to through money. And in another iambic, the beginning of which is, I care not for the riches of Gyges, he introduces Charon, the artist speaking. Thus also Aemon, the son of Creon, and the husband of Antigone, in Sophocles, while he supplicates his father Creon for the life of Antigone, commemorates the praises of Antigone not from his own proper, but from another person. It is necessary also to change enthymemes, and sometimes to change them into sentences, as, It is requisite that those who are intelligent should form compacts with enemies when they are in prosperity, for thus they will be attended with the greatest advantage. But this is done enthymematically, as follows, For if it is then requisite to form compacts when they are most useful, and replete with the most advantageous conditions, it is also necessary that they should be made in prosperity. Chapter 18. With respect to interrogation, it is then especially seasonable to employ it when something is said by the opponent of such a nature, that by the addition of one interrogation an absurdity will ensue. Thus Pericles asked Lampo concerning the mysteries of Ceres, who was called the saviour goddess. But Lampo replied, that it was unlawful for one who was uninitiated to hear them related. Pericles, however, again asked him, if he knew these mysteries, and Lampo replying that he did, and how is this possible, said Pericles, since you are uninitiated? In the second place, it is seasonable to employ interrogation when one of the premises, from which something follows favourable to our cause, is perspicuous. But the other will be evidently granted by the opponent. For then it is requisite to interrogate concerning such premise, and immediately conclude, without interrogating concerning the other premise, which is perspicuous. Thus Socrates, when Meletus accused him of not believing there were gods, asked him whether he thought there was any such thing as a daemonical nature. And when Meletus acknowledged that he did, Socrates also asked him whether demons were not either the sons of the gods, or something divine. But Meletus granting that they were, is it possible therefore, said Socrates, that any one can believe that there are sons of the gods, and yet that there are no gods? Farther still, interrogation may likewise be seasonably employed when we wish to show that the opponent contradicts himself, or asserts something paradoxical. In the fourth place, it may be opportunely employed when the opponent can only answer to what is said sophistically, by asserting that a certain thing is, and is not, or partly is, and partly is not, or in a certain respect is, and in a certain respect is not. For the auditors are disturbed by such answers, and are dubious as to their meaning. When however none of the above mentioned opportunities occur, interrogation must not be employed. For if it should happen that the opponent answers properly, and eludes the interrogation, he who interrogates will appear to be vanquished. For many questions must not be asked on account of the imbecility of the mind of the auditor. Hence it is especially necessary that enthymemes should be contracted. It is likewise requisite to reply to ambiguous questions by logically dividing, and not speaking concisely. But to things apparently true, a solution must immediately be given with the answer before the opponent can add a second interrogation, or syllogize. For it is not difficult to foresee what he wishes to infer. This however and the solutions, i.e. the mode of avoiding and solving captious interrogations, will be manifest to us from the topics. If the question also of the opponent produces a conclusion against us, it will be opportune in the answer to assign the cause why it does so. Thus Sophocles, being asked by Pisander whether he was of the opinion of the other senators that a dominion of 40 persons should be established, he replied that he was. And when he was asked again, Does not this appear to you to be a base thing? He said, It does. Have you therefore, Pisander replied, given your assent to this base deed? I have, said Sophocles, for no better measure could be adopted. Thus too, that Lacon, who had been an ephorus or senator, when he was desired to give an account of his conduct while he was in administration, was asked by some one, Whether his colleagues appeared to him to have been justly condemned ? He replied, they did. But the other then said, Did not you also decree the same things together with them ? He acknowledged that he did. Is it not therefore just, the other replied, that you should be put to death ? By no means, said Lacon, for they did these things having received money for doing them ; but I did not, since my conduct was the result of my own judgment. Hence, neither is it proper to interrogate after the conclusion, nor to interrogate concerning the conclusion itself, unless much truth is contained in it. With respect to ridicule, however, since it appears to possess a certain use in contests, and it is necessary, as Gorgias rightly said, that the serious arguments of the opponent should be dissolved by laughter, and his laughter by serious arguments, we have shown in the Poetic how many species of ridicule there are. But of these species, one indeed is adapted to a liberal man, and another is not. The orator therefore must assume that species of ridicule which is adapted to the occasion. Irony, however, is more liberal than scurrility. For he who employs irony produces the ridiculous for his own sake, but he who employs scurrility for the sake of another person. CHAPTER 19. Epilogue, however, or peroration, is composed from four things. From that which may cause the auditor to think well of the orator and ill of his opponent, from amplification and extenuation, from that which may excite the passions of the auditor, and from recalling to the memory what has been said. For it is natural after demonstration for the orator to show that what he has asserted is true, and that what his opponent has said is false, and thus to praise and blame and conciliate the good opinion of the audience. But of two things it is requisite that the orator should direct his attention to one of them, viz. Either to show that he is good to the audience, or that he is simply a worthy man, and that his opponent is bad to the audience, or that he is simply a bad man. We have shown, however, what the places are from which things of this kind are to be derived, viz. Whence it may be inferred that men are worthy or depraved. In the next place, it is requisite to amplify or extenuate according to nature what has now been demonstrated. For it is necessary that it should be acknowledged a thing has been done, if the orator intends to speak of its magnitude. For the increase of bodies is from pre-existent substances. But we have already shown whence the places of amplification and extenuation are to be derived. After these things, however, since it is evident what their quality and quantity are, the orator should excite the passions of the auditor. But these are pity and indignation, anger and hatred, envy, emulation, and contention. And we have before shown the places of these. Hence it remains that in the peroration, the orator should recall into the memory of the audience what has been before said. But this is to be done in such a way as others improperly teach us to do in proems. For that a thing may be easily understood, they order us to repeat it frequently. In proems, indeed, it is necessary to speak of the thing which is the subject of discussion, lest the audience should be ignorant what that is which is to be decided. But here in peroration, the arguments which have been employed must be summarily repeated. The beginning, however, of the peroration should be, that the orator has accomplished what he promised, so that he must then explain what those things are of which he has spoken, and on what account they were discussed by him. But the repetition should be made from a comparison of what has been said by the opponent, and it is requisite to compare either such things as have been said on the same subject, both by the orator and his opponent, or such things as have not been said by both of them on the same subject, as, And he indeed said this on the subject, but I that, and for these reasons, or the repetition should be made from irony, as, For he said this, but I that, and, What would he have done if he had shown that those things were transacted, and not these? Or from interrogation, as, What has not been shown? Or thus, What has the opponent shown? Either, therefore, the repetition must be thus made, or it must be made from comparison, or the orator must repeat in a natural order what he has said. And again, if he is so inclined, he may repeat what his opponent has said. That mode of diction, however, is adapted to the conclusion of the oration, which is called disjunctive, in order that it may be an epilogue, and not an oration ; such as, I have said, you have heard, you are masters of the subject, judge for yourselves. End of Book 3, and end of Rhetoric, by Aristotle, translated by Thomas Taylor. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.